Hey guys, what's going on? Mike the Caveman Kuhn here again, Paleo Primal Long Island, and MikeTheCaveman.com. And today's question came from a good friend of mine, Lisa, and she was assigned by a professor to have to watch Forks Over Knives. Now, for those of you who are fortunately unaware of what Forks Over Knives is, but odds are you're probably living under a rock if you didn't at this point. But unfortunately, Forks Over Knives is a documentary, and I use that term very loosely, about how plant-based eating, plant-based diets are the way to go for health, okay? Now, we tackled this a little bit when we talked about Beyond Meat and the concept of using meat alternatives, the future of meat, about whether or not we are actually beyond meat, whether or not we can maintain a vegetarian and or vegan diet in a healthful manner. Now, if you are very meticulous about your food and very meticulous about your supplementation, is it possible to be healthy on a vegan or vegetarian diet? And the short answer is yes. Yes, it is. The problem is, most people are not doing what is necessary. Rather than eating real whole foods, they're eating processed garbage. So at its heart, eating a lot of plants, real, organic plants, no problem. I'm okay with that. My problem is with the removal of the animal products, okay? Why are we doing that? Now, there are three main reasons why. The obvious one, as argued for in Forks Over Knives, is health. Now, the scope of that is well beyond what I can do in this video. If you want a real detailed critique of that documentary, I highly recommend you head on over to Food SOS, which is Denise Minger's site, and she tears it apart in what is essentially a book. She also does the same to T. Colin Campbell's book, The China Study, which Forks Over Knives was partly based upon. So, you really want some good information on why all of that is nonsense, head on over to Denise Minger's site. That being said, the short version of it, the conclusion reached in that documentary and in that study, is that the diseases of Western civilization, cancer, heart disease, strokes, neurodegenerative diseases, according to that documentary, they are all the result of animal products, particularly animal protein, as well as cholesterol. Now, we already talked about a couple of times in the bacon one why cholesterol is not bad. We also talked about during the sun exposure one why cholesterol is essential. Without cholesterol, you will not have vitamin D. You will not have an immune system. You will not have sex hormones. You are going to have a miserable life. So, arbitrarily lowering your cholesterol levels is not the way to go. That being said, most people are hypo-responders to cholesterol, meaning that when they eat cholesterol, there is no change. I repeat that again, no change in their serum cholesterol, their blood cholesterol levels. However, those 30%, that hyper-responders, when they eat it, generally there is a proportional rise in both LDL and HDL, meaning there's not a change in the ratio. There is no real change in health risk factors. Now, like we said, cholesterol is more of a marker, not as a causative factor. Going back to animal protein specifically, there is nothing inherent about animal protein that makes it magically more deleterious than plant proteins. They are the same. If you go too low, you're going to have a problem. If you go too high, you're going to have a problem. Doesn't really matter what source it's coming from in terms of pure protein. Now, in the documentary, they were talking about casein, okay, which that is the deleterious milk protein. That then became conflated to equal all animal dietary protein, okay? That's not the same thing. There are a lot of other animal proteins. And the crazy part is a lot of the evidence, the anecdotes they use to support their hypothesis, they were using cultures that their health benefits are likely better supported by their inclusion of marine animals. So most of those cultures that were eating a vegetarian diet were also eating copious amounts of fish and other marine products like seaweeds and such. So the fact of the matter is, that's not the problem. So let's just throw the health part to the side for a second, and let's move on to something else that I've heard a lot about lately, especially with the World No Meat Day having just passed. The idea of moving beyond meat, right? The Beyond Meat concept. Being able to sustain life without using meat. Because, you know, it's bad for the environment. That's number two. Meat is terrible for the environment, right? Releases methane gas and just no good. It's going to cause global warming. It's just a problem. Problem is, when we want to raise those crops, most land on this planet is not suitable for growing crops. So how do we make it suitable? Well, first we have to tear down forests and pastures and rainforests and other things that will help bring down greenhouse gases. So we're destroying whole ecosystems. Let's tear up that topsoil, which is full of both minerals and it's full of bacteria that are essential to life. We tear it up and then we have to replace it with more fertilizers. And we have to apply pesticides, and we have to apply herbicides. And so now we're applying a whole bunch of chemicals that weren't there before. And because most of that land, we said, is not able to sustain farming by itself, water has to be transported over. How does that water get there? It's transported there somehow, which requires even more energy. So we're burning so much energy just to support those monocrops. The problem is, how do we do that in a way that is sustainable? On the other hand, if we were able to allow animals to graze, well, when that happens, we're no longer having to grow those crops to feed those animals. That's where that grass-fed concept comes in so huge. I talk about it all the time. It's not just for you, it's for the environment, it's for the world. If we don't feed those animals those grains, then they'll actually eat what they are designed to eat. And you can rotate the crop. So when the animals have plowed through that pasture, well, now you can plant some vegetation there. Now you can plant some grains and some legumes there, because those were usually rotational crops. Legumes, beans, they are incredible nitrogen fixers. They pull nitrogen from the air and they put it into the soil. That's a great thing if you want to grow crops there afterwards. And when those crops died, when those beans died, well, you just provided a whole bunch more minerals for that crop to grow next time. So you'd use those beans as a way to grow better vegetables next time. So, if we're talking about an environmental standpoint, we are going to be much better off supporting those farmers who are doing the right thing, that are working on grass-fed, organic, pasture-raised, right? Their animals are in the right place. They're not using the pesticides. They're not using the herbicides. They're doing it in an organic manner. And then they go and rotate their crops, and they rotate their animals, and they're able to support themselves. Joel Salatin of Polyface Farms has an incredible system lined up for that. And if we could adopt that around the world, we could be doing a lot better off. But it's okay, because we're not going to eat the animals. We're not going to kill the animals, right? Well, what do you think happens to those ecosystems? Were they arid? There was nothing there? Even if it was a desert that we were turning into a crop, there would still be animals there, okay? There would still be plants there. There would still be microbes. There would be fungi. There would be nematodes. There would be so many different things that you are now destroying. At what point does life lose its value? Just because a life form isn't fluffy, does it matter? Why doesn't it matter? Why is an insect less important than a cow? Why are the bacteria in that soil less important than a chicken? It doesn't make sense. Life is life, and in order for something to live, something else must die, you know. Hi, Savannah. Yeah, circle of life comes around. There are lots of other options. Moving over to just plants is not the way. Just like Anakin, by trying to avoid death, you're going to cause more in the long run. Alright? Do you want to be Darth Vader? I didn't think so. The last part, of course, is the treatment of animals. And the industrial agricultural system is a terrible thing, okay? Not only is it bad for the environment, it is bad for the animals themselves. I'm not advocating for that at all. I agree entirely. We need to do something about the way we are currently raising animals. What do? We do it in a sustainable way. That is the key. The key isn't to stop eating animals. The key is not to only grow monocrops. Those, besides having minimal health benefit, are going to destroy this planet. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. If you have anything else you want to know that's a little more specific about that, you let me know. Either way, make sure to like and subscribe down below. You know what to do. Share with your friends. You can find me over on Instagram and Twitter at Mike the Caveman, over on Facebook on Paleo Primal Long Island, and of course over at MikeTheCaveman.com. That being said, guys, enjoy this beautiful weather. Allow your cholesterol to get converted into vitamin D, and I'll see you next time, guys.